Today, I'm going to talk about outcomes in metaphors. So, for those of you who have studied metaphors and movement levels 1 and 2, you know that there are four things that we can look at when we look at outcomes in metaphor. Now, normally when the training goes, you learn metaphors of movement isn't about outcomes, isn't about those kind of things. However, once you've really got to grips with the basics, once you've got more skilled in the idiomization of things, looking at direction, distance, mode, and rate becomes a really insightful way to look at a client's problems, a client's challenges, and offer them new ways of thinking about the challenges that they're facing. So what I'm going to do today in this video is I'm going to talk more in depth about direction, distance, mode, and rate and how I use this in my metaphors of movement sessions. There is also an additional component, that's time. Now, for those of you interested, metaphors of movement level 6, great stuff, mind-blowing work. So you've got the time portal and I'll put a link for that in the description as well. So I've created a lovely little slide for us. So just to quickly define what these things are. Okay. So to achieve an outcome within a metaphor, within a metaphorical landscape, we need four things. And time, we're just going to focus on these four. So we need a direction. Ultimately, which specific direction or directions can we go in? We've got distance, which is how far away specifically that thing is from where we are. We've got the mode, which is how we get from A to B. And we have the rate, which is how fast we get to the destination. So looking at all of these things, I want to talk about how they show up in metaphor, how you can use this to better understand a client's problem or challenge. So what's an example of someone who has direction? I have direction in life. I have a direction that I'm going on. So normally directions are very delineated or marked out regarding specific ways to go. Paths, really good way at looking at direction. They might have a path in front, to the left, to the right. There might be a river that offers some kind of direction. Ultimately, it's something that shows us very specifically a way in which they could go. Now, it could be there's a person to the right, a building to the left. Those similarly are directions a person can go in. So what does a lack of direction look like? So this is immersions, for those of you who've done level 3. Lack of direction, same everywhere. It could also be, well, have you ever seen that kind of, I just don't know where I'm going. I just feel lost. Now, lost, someone might be trees all the way around them. They may be in a clearing, so they're in a pretty clear space. So they're clear they're lost, but ultimately it's very unclear which way to go. Similarly, if somebody's in a field, now it could be argued they're outstanding in their field. There's field in front, there's rolling hills, there's whatever. That sounds like a lovely idealistic environment, but they don't have a specific direction that they're going in. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem because sometimes it's good to just go with it, being on a journey, enjoy the journey and not really have a direction. Just go for a wander and experience what's happening. Nothing wrong with that at all. But normally clients come to us with a problematic state or experience, so this can be a specific thing. They don't know which way to go, they haven't considered that. Now, moving on from this, we've got distance. How far away is something? So let's just imagine I'm in a field. I've got field left, field right. It looks all lovely, all idyllic, flowery field, lovely. But there's no specific distance. Now, distance predefines that they have a specific goal, a specific thing in mind that they are looking to go towards, or depending on which direction they're going. Now, that specific distance gives us an idea of how close relatively they are to it. If let's just imagine in front of me, there's like a little tree to the right, and then further in the future, there's like a big town and big city, we've got an idea of what sort of things are in their environment. Well, I see some milestones along a road, and then there's a big city in the distance. This person knows where they're going and they've got specific milestones along that journey. So they've got very clear points of reference that they can go to see their progress or to see whatever direction they're looking to go in. So why is having a distance and having a direction, putting these two together important? Well, Ultimately, why change? I was working with a woman the other day and she had like mud in pretty much all directions other than one where there was like a little bush. Where's she going? Ultimately, in order to move out of a tricky situation, a troubling situation, a challenging situation, sometimes we need to think, where do we actually want to go? Because sometimes it takes a lot of effort for us to move, to do something. So having at least an idea of what you're looking for can be useful. Now, when I have a client that's got no real defined direction or distance, or they've got no real defined what I would class as a goal, I would say direction and distance is, do they have a goal? Mode and rate is their ability to get there. So if we look at direction and distance together, if somebody's lacking that, I tell them this story. So I think it was about 3 years ago now, I was starting to put on a lot of weight. I was starting to get pretty heavy, or at least heavy or fat from my perspective. And I was like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. So it was the 27th of December, and I'm like, screw it. I am going to do a half marathon. So I booked in the calendar, like 6 months down the line, and I did a really good job. Like, I went to the gym, I signed up, I did all of that stuff. I mean, I sort of failed the last month beforehand, something I still need to work on. But ultimately, I did it. I got there and I got to the day of the marathon. I did the half marathon. I got through it. Yay, it was awesome. I felt good about myself. But then I paused and reflected, and I'm like, well, was it actually worth it? Did I actually want it? Now, a couple of days later, I had a few friends of mine. I used to live in the Czech Republic, and every year they dress like Spartans. So they're like all muscular, and I'm like, that's what I want. I ultimately want to look really attractive. I want to feel physically fit and physically buff. That's what I wanted. So I called the guys. I'm like, look, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to set up. And they're like, yeah, sure, come along. So I put it in the diary, similarly did the work because you can't be the fattest Spartan, right? Um, I was. However, I was so much more fitter than I was. I was so much stronger, and I'd worked a hell of a lot more towards my goal. Now, I personally don't like goals. What's your 5-year goal, 10-year goal? I've always struggled with that. I'm like, just go away, mug. Mug. I've always done that. But by having a bit of a goal, by having that goal, working towards it, believing it's the direction I want to go in, by reaching it, I realized, do I want to go there or not? Do I want to do something else or not? Another example I do give some people, depending on context, is so when I started Metaphors of Movement, I started it 2, 3 years ago, and I was like, I think it was February. And I said, by November, I want to have 10 people in a training course. 10 people, I want to be training 10 people in Metaphors of Movement. That's the intention I set out. I didn't get 10 people in November. But because I set that goal, I ended up having 4 different Metaphors of Movement courses. And over the course of the year, I had 19 people in total. Just because I set that goalpost, just because I set that direction. So ultimately, why am I telling people this story? I'm getting them to consider the value of having a specific goal or direction. Now, people don't necessarily need that. But ultimately, if you've got to go through struggle, if you've got to go through hardship, if you've got to go through pain, it's nice to know where you're going. Sometimes it's good to get away from pain. Let's just imagine if someone's got a knife behind them or they are in visceral pain, they do want to escape. So that's not an issue. The issue is, well, where am I going? What's worth it for me to actually take steps to get out of this situation? So that's direction and distance. Now, mode and rate are slightly different. But just before I do that, I want to quickly go back to direction and distance and talk about containers. So if you think about it, as much as Metaphors of Movement is not an outcome focused therapy, why do we get the person to grow up and grow out of these things? Well, if you think about it, if you're in a container, now you might have a direction. Let's say there's a window and you can see where you want to go. You might have a direction and distance, but you have an inability to get there because there are barriers that stop you progressing to get to where you are. Whereas most people, when they grow up, grow out of these things, they find themselves outside there in the world. Sometimes people go into other containers, etc. But for example, if somebody's out there in the world, they're no longer safe in their container. They're no longer constrained by the rules that were put around them through their upbringing. But what problems come with that? Because let's imagine I don't have a tree outside, or I don't have something outside that I see. Imagine like I've got no way to have a different outlook. By getting them to grow up and grow out of these things, they're faced with a new challenge because they need to figure out or think about where they actually want to go, because they can now go somewhere. They can now do something about it. They can now take steps when previously they can't. So this is another consideration when you think about outcome and containers, because there are challenges. Once you get out of a container, I had an interesting thing. I can't remember. It was in systems thinking. Every intervention we do, every change we do as a coach or therapist or change worker or personal development practitioner, there are consequences. The person is stuck. They see nowhere out. They're boxed in that container. By them growing up and growing out of it, there are consequences. Yes, they feel open. Yes, they feel freer, but then they've got choice to do something. For those of you who are into personal development and into awareness, how often do we realize, oh, now I'm aware, I can do something about it, but that's pressure, stress, however you interpret that, ultimately, because you can take now responsibility for it, because you have the awareness, you know you can do something about it. Awareness is good, but it can also ultimately make life harder. Some people would say it would make it more fulfilling, but it does have a difficulty and challenge to it. So as much as everybody says self-awareness is great, there are some people who are completely happy who don't have a clue about anything. So there are pros and cons to these things. So coming back to mode and rate. So mode is how we get to our destination, how we move through the world. Now, there is a strong argument that taking steps is quite a good way to go, because ultimately, if you're taking steps, you are your own agency. You are the one taking steps to go forward, which means ultimately you're in full control. Now, if you're in a car, if you're in a plane, if you're in a boat, if you're on a ship, you are not the one who's got the agency. The vehicle that's getting you from A to B has the agency itself. And what we can do is we can see some real interesting juxtapositions, or let's say conflicts within metaphor based on people's wanting and their outcomes. So let's just imagine I'm walking along a road, but I'm walking not just on any road, I'm walking on a motorway or a highway. So my support and understanding for the situation is I should be going fast, I should be getting from A to B really quickly. Ultimately, the location and environment I've put myself in dictates that in order to be safe, in order to not get run down, I need a vehicle to get to where I'm going. Doesn't mean you can't walk along the road, but there are certain risks to doing that. So ultimately, that person wants to be in the higher road. They look forward to being in the fast lane, for example, but they might find themselves getting run down if they don't have a vehicle. I mean, there could still be a bit of a car crash if things were to go awry. But the other way to look at that is, well, does the person need to be walking on that kind? Do they need that kind of support or that kind of understanding? Why can't they be walking maybe a more natural path, or a path that doesn't offer certain other risks? They might not get there as fast, but they do ultimately have agency. So is this the right path or the right road or the right route for them to be on? Because there's an interesting juxtaposition. Now, rate determines how fast or slow we get there. Now, there's an interesting thing regarding rate. If you're eliciting multiple metaphors for somebody, an interesting consideration, let's say you've done 4 or 5, are they moving in their metaphors? Now, most people, when they're stuck, they're not moving. Some people are always moving. You know the person. They're always on the go. They're always doing something. And an interesting invitation that I've mentioned to people who are always walking, always taking steps, always doing stuff. Ultimately, my catchphrase, keep on taking steps, is because a lot of the time I don't take steps. So that's to remind me and to remind you, if you're that kind of person, to take steps. Those that are always taking steps, they don't need to worry about that. But they might consider, well, When can I actively choose to not be taking steps? When can I actually choose to take a break? When can I actually choose to not be doing something all the time? But that's a mini side consideration. So rate is about how fast and how quickly we get there. Now, if we're thinking back to transportation, if we're using cars or aeroplanes, there's certain fuel, certain resources that are needed, things that need to get externally to keep things moving forward. Ultimately, things could break down, that could slow progress, there could be issues in the path, issues in the road, issues in the way forward. So these are some other considerations. So direction and distance, ultimately, does the person have somewhere they're going? That's a key thing. And the stories that I utilize don't necessarily say you should have an outcome, but is a my personal story. And I'd invite you to think of some of your own of when you've had a goal, when you've had an outcome, how it's been useful for you. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean it gave you everything, because for me, it gave me clarity on what I did or didn't want. And modem rate presupposes how quickly or how fast someone can get there. If something's in the distance, they've got to take a fair few steps. It's going to take time. So they can be aware of that. Ultimately, that they've got to be patient and they've got to be keep on taking steps. Now, we know in metaphors of movement, you may take one step and you might move a lot quicker through the environment than you expect. That these are some of the things to consider. So that's outcomes in metaphor, direction, distance, mode, and rate. Start to consider it. Start to look at it as an extra element within your metaphors, and it'll add a whole new way at how you look at what the person's able to achieve if they're actually looking to achieve anything, and some things they can start to think about in their experiences and challenges. As always, keep on taking steps unless you take too many, and I'll catch you at the next one.